Hello, I'm Federico Pena, Secretary of Transportation. Noise is a constant companion of almost everyone in today's modern world. Noise affects different people in different ways. Most people would agree, however, that the nation's parks and wilderness areas are designed to be places where people can go to get away from the hubbub of everyday life. At times, however, noise from various sources, both on the ground and in the air, can compromise the solitude found in parks. The issue of noise intrusion is not necessarily a someone wins, someone loses situation. Rather, it can be a win-win situation for all parties involved. With information and education, and with all of us making small changes in the way we do things, people both on the ground and in the air can peacefully coexist. Our focus here is on positive learning experiences and the application of sensible procedures that protect everyone's park experience. Our goal is to motivate pilots and passengers to be good neighbors during their park visits. To this end, we have worked with the National Park Service and the Department of the Interior to develop policies and procedures to reduce aircraft noise signatures while improving viewing pleasure and safety for all.
Hello, I'm John Garamendi, Deputy Secretary for the Department of Interior. Our nation's parks are some of our most precious resources. In 1872, Congress set aside a parcel of land in northwest Wyoming as the nation's first national park. Today, Yellowstone National Park makes up just a fraction of this country's parklands. Not only do these parks and wilderness areas provide a peaceful escape for all citizens today, but they also serve to protect the natural quiet for the future generations to enjoy. Millions of visitors annually tour these lands to experience the grandeur and beauty our country has to offer. A large part of that experience is the natural quiet that somehow soothes the soul and recharges the spirit. However, the stillness and quiet is becoming increasingly hard to find. This is due to many factors, including the noise created by snowmobiles, chainsaws, automobiles, and various aircraft operations. This problem can be solved best through understanding and cooperation. So the Department of Interior and the National Park Service have teamed up with the Department of Transportation and the Federal Aviation Administration to develop a program that can help make it possible for everyone to enjoy the resources of our great country.
Over the past 10 years, visits to our nation's parks and recreation areas have risen dramatically as people are increasingly searching for an escape from the realities and pressures of everyday life. Along with the spiraling growth of park visitors, there has been a significant increase in the number of overflights by sightseeing aircraft. For example, of the 4 million people that visit the Grand Canyon every year, nearly 1/5 of them take to the skies for a bird's-eye view of the natural wonders. Almost 2,500 miles away in Hawaii, commercial and private sightseeing flights over the lush landscape have increased dramatically over the past 10 years. These flights and many others in and around the over 80 million acres under National Park Service control spawn numerous complaints every year. Aircraft noise is something that most of us have experienced at one time or another, whether it's been in a park or at home. In your backyard, you may dismiss the noise as just another intrusion into your urban or suburban lifestyle, another ingredient in the daily mix of sound. On the other hand, a different attitude tends to prevail when you encounter the unnatural sound of aircraft noise within the natural setting of parks, lakes, rivers, or wilderness areas. This intrusion often elicits feelings of anger or frustration at the pilot and the aviation community for bringing the reminders of urban living to the very place that the person went to escape such annoyances. Not surprisingly, studies have shown that complaints for any given noise exposure will be greatest in rural areas where people expect more peace and quiet. Most noise studies use a common numeric measure of noise referred to as a decibel. For example, rustling leaves emit an average noise level of 20 decibels. Normal conversational speech is generally up around the 65 decibel level, while your home lawnmower produces noise in the 98 decibel range. In comparison, a Cessna 172 on approach and at a distance of about 6,500 feet produces a noise level of about 61 decibels. In general, people's perception of noise can vary with the frequency, rate, distance, and change of the sound, as well as the level of background noise. As little as a 10 decibel increase in intensity is heard by the human ear as a doubling of the loudness of the noise. Therefore, an increase in noise level from 20 decibels to 60 decibels is heard as a noise 16 times louder. So it's not surprising that the phones really start ringing when aircraft fly over noise-sensitive areas at low levels. The noise can get so bad at times that it can completely blot out normal conversation on the ground. People aren't the only ones that are affected by noise.
Overflying aircraft can have an effect on wildlife that may not really be apparent or evident just as you're flying. Birds of prey, for example, and specifically at Black Canyon, the peregrine falcon, which nests among the cliffs of Black Canyon, can be impacted by their behavior from what we've observed, where the peregrines become really subdued. Their flight patterns become more erratic.
In terms of aerial flights affecting animals, I think it depends primarily on how the flight is conducted, how high it is over the animals. For example, if a helicopter were to be at a low level over elk that were mating or other animals, I think it could be very disturbing to those animals.
I think the natural quiet is an essential ingredient to visitors' experiences when they're in wild places, such as Black Canyon and the vast array of other parks and monuments. Oftentimes, aircraft will fly into a location because it's magnificent. It's a glorious view, and that's where visitors are. And to the extent of that would vary from visitor to visitor, how much they've noticed that.
Just as the perception and reaction to noise is highly dependent on the individual person, it is no different with wildlife. For example, in studies conducted by various government agencies, it was found that for the same level of noise, Canadian geese have absolutely no tolerance, while turkey vultures are indifferent. Of course, most wildlife are particularly sensitive to noise and other disruptions during their nesting and breeding seasons. The overall findings of these studies show that wildlife response to noise varies just like humans. These diverse effects within and among species has been the driving force behind protecting many noise-sensitive areas. Still, flight in and around most of our country's natural wonders doesn't have to be a thing of the past. Just a few simple steps that you, as a pilot, can take prior to your next flight are enough to make a difference. Not only will this help park residents and visitors, but it can also have the positive effect of changing the public's perception of the aviation community. Pre-flight planning is the best place to start any flight, and a flight over noise-sensitive areas is no exception. A little extra time spent in the flight planning process will translate to a more informed pilot and a better chance of diminishing your noise impact. While flying in a familiar urban environment, pilots should be alert to noise-sensitive areas. However, just because we're more aware of an aircraft's noise impact around congested areas doesn't mean we shouldn't be just as cognizant of the effect of aircraft noise in rural and park areas. Since it's normally more difficult to identify areas to avoid when flying outside of cities and towns, thorough pre-flight planning is essential. There are several sources available to the pilot to help in determining the relative noise sensitivity of areas along the proposed flight path. First, check the sectional charts for your proposed route. Look for the solid blue line with small blue dots on the enclosure side. This symbol outlines the boundaries of National Park Service areas, Fish and Wildlife Service areas, and Forest Service wilderness and primitive areas. Printed on the border of all sectional charts are the regulations regarding flights over these areas. Together with restrictions against landing and airdrops within these areas, this notice also refers to FAA Advisory Circular 9136. This advisory circular, entitled Visual Flight Rules, Flight Near Noise-Sensitive Areas, encourages pilots making VFR flights within 2,000 feet of noise-sensitive areas to fly at altitudes of at least 2,000 feet above the highest terrain or the uppermost rim of a canyon or valley. In addition to the margin notice, some sectionals may print an advisory box near the noise-sensitive area. Other areas with highly congested airspace and extensive traffic flow regulations, such as the Grand Canyon, may even have a dedicated VFR sectional. This chart, for example, denotes the Special Flight Rules area with a unique symbol. These types of flight rules, known as Special FARs, are in place at the Grand Canyon and in the state of Hawaii. They specifically regulate aircraft safety and altitude. Unfortunately, due to space limitations, not all noise-sensitive areas are depicted on the sectional. There are millions of acres of state and municipal parks that should also be considered as noise-sensitive areas when pilots plan their flights. One of the best ways to find out about these areas is to ask local pilots, or better yet, get a local checkout prior to flying in an unfamiliar area. If you're not departing from a local airport, call the State Division of Aeronautics, the FAA Flight Service Station, or the Flight Standards District Office for the state or region along your route for more detailed information. Phone numbers for the local FSS or FSDO are listed in the Airport Facility Directory and in the telephone book under Federal Government. Additionally, you can contact park staff regarding any noise-sensitive areas along your proposed route of flight. Park rangers, whose numbers are also listed in the government section of the phone book, may be able to suggest preferred routes and times. While you're at it, you should also check the Special Notices section of the Airport Facility Directory for information on designated noise-sensitive areas. Lastly, check the latest NOTAMs for any newly or temporarily designated noise-sensitive areas, as well as recent additions or changes to existing areas. Once you have determined where the noise-sensitive areas are, you can intelligently plan your route of flight. Obviously, the best thing to do is to avoid noise-sensitive areas altogether. If that's not practical, like this route across the Sierra Nevadas in Northern California, then plan to stay at least 2,000 feet above the highest terrain. Also, don't forget to adhere to the VFR cruising altitudes rule. Another good way to keep your noise impact to a minimum is to plan to fly over high ambient noise areas as much as possible. For example, if you overfly heavily traveled highways, your aircraft noise will be less noticeable since it will tend to blend into the existing highway noise. However, attempt to avoid any scenic overlooks you may encounter. Another key way to lessen your noise impact is to avoid flying along rivers in general, and particularly those that are known for their pristine rafting or whitewater experience. This is particularly important since people on river trips are there in part to enjoy the natural sounds of the river. Following known active railroad tracks may also be a good idea since it's an area where people expect to hear noise. However, be aware that some older railroads are being converted to hiking paths under the National Rails to Trails program. Another consideration in your flight planning should be the proposed arrival and departure time over noise-sensitive areas. Afternoons may be the best time of the day to fly, since more of your aircraft's noise will usually travel upward toward the relatively cooler air and away from the people and animals on the ground. Even the time of year may be important when it comes to your impact on wildlife breeding and nesting. Since wildlife varies from park to park, your best bet is to call the parks over which you may be flying as part of your pre-flight planning. Ask questions about preferred flight routes and times of flight. Let the park know that you want to do your part to reduce noise impacts on humans and wildlife. During your pre-flight weather briefing, check the surface winds and winds aloft. Wind not only tends to carry the sound away, but it also creates a background noise of its own, which may help mask some of the aircraft noise reaching the surface. Therefore, flying downwind of noise-sensitive areas can help to reduce your noise impact. Although relative humidity has little effect on noise propagation, the presence of fog, drizzle, and light snow may indicate nearly calm conditions and the need for noise abatement procedures. Another factor to consider during your pre-flight planning is the density altitude. As DA increases, not only does the engine have to work harder to produce the same thrust, but your climb rate will decrease. With a decreased climb rate, you spend more time closer to the ground where your noise impact is the greatest. For this reason, in high-density altitude conditions, plan your departure path to pass over other than noise-sensitive areas. Just as many factors can influence the degree to which aircraft noise is transmitted, the amount of noise that your aircraft produces is also a product of several factors. As you might expect, large radial engines are far more noisy than today's turbine engines, while most reciprocating engines may be even quieter still. The noisier your aircraft, the higher you should plan to fly. Of course, any power plant will tend to be more noisy the harder it works. An increase in gross weight or load factor can cause your noise signature to increase dramatically. Therefore, try to avoid flights at or near maximum gross weight. Also, plan your route to avoid excessive maneuvering in the vicinity of noise-sensitive areas. Efforts to control your noise impact don't have to stop after your pre-flight planning is complete. There are several techniques that you can employ during your flight that will help reduce your audible presence. For example, most aircraft are noisiest near the rear due to the placement of the exhaust and the prop wash. Therefore, if possible, try to do your run-up with the tail of the aircraft pointed away from any noise-sensitive areas located near your departure airport. After takeoff, climb as quickly as possible. If you can, use your best rate of climb instead of your best angle of climb. Try to avoid a long, low climb out whenever possible. Also, once you're airborne, reduce your power as soon as it is safe, practical, and in accordance with the pilot's operating handbook. Additionally, turn to avoid any sensitive areas along your departure route as soon as safety and regulations permit. Upon reaching your cruising altitude, fly your route as planned and stay as high as practical over noise-sensitive areas, but normally no lower than the recommended 2,000 feet AGL. As a general rule, avoid flying patterns over the same area. However, if it's unavoidable, try to vary your route to prevent constantly exposing the same places to your noise signature. Air tour operators who fly routes resulting in repeated patterns should take time to meet with park managers to jointly develop acceptable flight patterns. A group of air tour operators and federal land managers worked together in the development of this map of flight patterns at Canyonlands National Park in Utah. The agreed-upon routes minimize the noise impact on the park while ensuring a business opportunity for the air tour operators. It's interesting to note that although flying lower reduces the size of the noise footprint, thereby affecting a smaller geographical area, a higher altitude over the same area will actually reduce the overall noise level. Therefore, increasing your altitude may be one of the most effective means of noise abatement. Lateral separation from parks is also a critical strategy to reduce noise impacts of aircraft overflights on park visitors and wildlife. If possible, try to fly at least 1 mile horizontally from noise-sensitive areas. Not only can you get a more panoramic view, but also the increased distance from rugged terrain can help avoid some orographic turbulence, allowing for a smoother, more relaxing flight. While cruising, use a low prop RPM. The higher your prop RPM, the more noise will be generated because, as the tips of your propeller approach the speed of sound, the ensuing shock wave creates a greatly increased noise level. To keep your prop RPM under control in aircraft equipped with fixed-pitch propellers, reduce your power when beginning a descent. In any aircraft, when descending for approach near noise-sensitive areas, try to hold altitude as long as possible to decrease your noise footprint over the approach corridor. A steep approach is preferable to a long, low approach. In helicopters, the noisiest approaches occur in the 55 to 65 knot airspeed range and at 400 to 600 feet per minute rate of descent. To keep noise to a minimum, try to fly the last 1,000 feet of altitude at 10 to 15 knots faster than normal. After landing in a jet or turboprop aircraft, use aerodynamic braking as much as possible to minimize the use of beta and thrust reversers. If you're continuing your trip to a nearby park or wilderness area, you'll appreciate other pilots and operators employing these simple techniques.
We've been flying together for about 6-7 years, ever since we first got married. We've done a lot of trips, actually all over the country. We really like to travel together. Flying together is great, and we're really into hiking and camping.
I've been a pilot for over 25 years. I think I was just walking when my daddy started bringing me to wilderness areas.
I've been flying off and on for about 20 years. I started flying with my dad and back in about '73, so it's been a while for me. I think the thing I like most about coming to wilderness areas and parks is just the peace and the solitude.
And I've been a pilot for over 15 years. And I think I've been canoeing for probably over 25 years. And I've really enjoyed it. I enjoy a lot of outdoor activities. Wow, did you see that fish jump right there? Whoa, there's some big fish in this lake.
We were hiking in the park, and there was a low-flying helicopter. And you really hear that noise, especially when everything around you is so quiet.
You hear the noise long before you ever see the aircraft itself, and it does hurt the natural beauty of it all.
When flying and planning my flight, I try to respect the fact that other people come up to these types of wilderness areas to enjoy the same things that I've just been talking about.
I think the first rule we have when it comes to flying, near parks or around parks is to try and avoid them just altogether.
Well, when I fly over parks or wilderness areas, I'll usually give myself fly at least 2,000 feet over the park, and I'll power back a little bit and use a little slower airspeed. And the piece of advice I would give other pilots is just be conscientious, be courteous of others. You can see a lot more at a slower airspeed and at a higher altitude, and just use common sense.
Do what I can to keep it a peaceful, enjoyable experience for the people on the ground, and I find that I enjoy the flight that much more.
Just use some common sense.
I think the byword for flying in and around wilderness areas is courtesy.
Think about what it's like if you're on the ground.
And use just some sound judgment.
Being considerate of the people and wildlife in and around the nation's parks is good for business, too.
Generally, I like to maintain at least a couple thousand feet, giving the people on the ground a fair leeway as far as noise. We find that most of our passengers that are in for the scenic ride enjoy the altitude, enjoy seeing more from a lofty perspective than, say, being down low. I would say in general, noise abatement and just being courteous to people on the ground has really presented no adverse operational difficulties at all.
We started here with the Park Service. We have initiated this thing as a joint venture, basically, not a monetary, but as far as agreements and things, and went to some expense to show the Park Service that we were going to work with them. We made our first runs. We done them on a temporary basis, that if they didn't like it, we wouldn't fly again. And everybody was happy, didn't hear a complaint from anyone.
As many have already discovered, a conscientious effort aimed at reducing aircraft noise problems in noise-sensitive areas is not a difficult or losing proposition. To become part of the solution, just remember the following guidelines prior to your next flight over or near a noise-sensitive area. During the planning phase of your flight, check the sectional charts for designated noise-sensitive areas. Get a local area checkout. Talk to local pilots. or the local flight service station to find out about uncharted noise-sensitive areas. And plan your route to avoid noise-sensitive areas when possible. If that's not practical, fly at least 2,000 feet above the highest terrain, and if possible, at least 1 mile horizontally from the noise-sensitive area, with as little maneuvering as possible. Adjust your route to fly over high ambient noise routes. Plan to fly during the afternoon. And lighten your load when possible. During the flight, the following techniques can help avoid noise problems. Use a high takeoff profile and turn away from noise-sensitive areas as soon as possible. While en route, stay as high as possible, vary your route, stay over high ambient noise areas when possible, and maintain a low prop RPM. When in the approach and landing phases, stay at altitude as long as possible and make a steep, short field type of approach. And if your aircraft is equipped, minimize the use of beta or thrust reversers. Just employing those few techniques will result in a better, more enjoyable experience for all those involved. Not only those in the air, but those on the ground as well.
As many pilots have already done, please help us keep our parks and recreation areas as peaceful as you'd like it if you were visiting on the ground. Remember, this program is voluntary, but unless the aviation community is willing to do its part, we may see strict regulations imposed. Aviation and quiet aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. Aviation is compatible with the park system, but only through understanding and mutual respect can we coexist.
We at the Department of Interior are proud to be charged with preserving and protecting the nation's natural treasures. Our goal is to keep them clean, pristine, and beautiful, and quiet places of refuge. The skies above are as important part of the environment as the ground below, and with cooperation, we can keep it quiet and serene.